Ball of molasses, 25 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour, crushing everything in its path like a sweet, sticky tsunami of death. On January 15, 1919, this nightmare became reality in Boston's North End, creating one of the most bizarre and tragic industrial disasters in American history. The morning started like any other winter day in Boston. Longshoremen headed to work at the bustling waterfront, children played in the narrow streets of the Italian immigrant neighborhood, and the elevated train rumbled overhead on Atlantic Avenue. But at 529 Commercial Street, something sinister was brewing inside a massive steel tank that loomed 50 feet above the cobblestones like a metallic giant. The Purity Distilling Company had built this monstrous storage tank in 1915 to hold molasses destined for rum production and munitions manufacturing during World War I. Standing 90 feet in diameter and 50 feet tall, it could hold over 2 million gallons of the thick, dark syrup. But from the very beginning, this industrial behemoth was a disaster waiting to happen. The tank had been constructed hastily and cheaply, using steel plates that were dangerously thin and rivets that were improperly installed. Workers had complained that the tank leaked so badly that children from the neighborhood would bring cups to collect the sweet drippings that oozed through the seams. The company's response was not to fix the leaks, but simply to paint the tank brown to camouflage the molasses stains. Arthur Gell, the company manager, had grown increasingly concerned about the tank's structural integrity. The steel groaned and creaked ominously, especially full. Local residents reported that the tank swayed visibly on windy days, and some claimed they could feel the ground vibrate when they walked near it. But corporate executives dismissed these concerns, prioritizing profit over safety in the post-war industrial boom. On January 12th, the tank had been filled to near capacity with a fresh shipment of molasses from the Caribbean. The thick syrup, warmed by an unusually mild January day, had been fermenting and creating pressure inside the tank. The temperature on January 15th had risen to an unseasonable 43 degrees Fahrenheit, causing the molasses to expand and the gases within to build to dangerous levels. At precisely 12:30 p.m., the inevitable happened. With a sound described by witnesses as resembling machine gun fire, the steel rivets began popping like bullets. The tank split open with a thunderous roar that shattered windows blocks away. 2 million gallons of molasses exploded outward in a devastating wave of sticky destruction. The initial wave stood 25 feet high and moved with the speed of a freight train. The molasses, despite its viscous nature, flowed like water due to its sheer volume and the pressure behind it. It swept away everything in its path with the force of a natural disaster, but far more terrifying because of its unnatural, suffocating nature. The first victims never knew what hit them. Giuseppe Antosca, a 10-year-old boy playing near the tank, was swept away instantly. Bridget Cloverty, collecting firewood with her daughter, saw the brown wall approaching and pushed her child to safety before being consumed by the sticky flood. Patrick Breen, a laborer, was literally picked up and carried 2 blocks before being crushed against a building. The molasses didn't just flow, it destroyed with calculated precision. The elevated train structure buckled and collapsed under the weight. The Boston police station was lifted off its foundation and carried away like a dollhouse. Horses and trucks were swept up and deposited blocks away, their drivers trapped inside vehicles that became amber tombs. Fire Station 31 took a direct hit. The molasses crashed through the building, trapping firefighters who had rushed outside to investigate the strange roaring sound. Lieutenant William Connor found himself waist-deep in the sticky mass, unable to move, watching helplessly as his fire truck was carried away by the sweet current. The Boston Elevated Railway car was crossing the area when the wave hit. The entire structure collapsed, sending passengers plummeting into the molasses below. Some were killed instantly by the impact, while others drowned in the viscous liquid, unable to swim or even move their limbs through the thick syrup. What made this disaster particularly horrifying was the nature of molasses itself. Unlike water, which would allow victims to swim or at least struggle, molasses created a death trap of unimaginable cruelty. The thick syrup filled victims' mouths and noses, making breathing impossible. Its adhesive properties meant that anyone caught in it became increasingly trapped as they struggled, with each movement making escape more difficult. The molasses didn't respect boundaries. It flowed into basements, trapping entire families. It seeped through windows and doors, filling first floors of buildings. Residents found themselves trapped in their own homes, the sweet smell of molasses masking the horror unfolding around them. Some buildings simply collapsed under the weight of the molasses pressing against their walls. Rescue efforts began immediately, but were hampered by the unique challenges of the disaster. Traditional rescue techniques were useless against an enemy made of sugar and corn syrup. Workers found that walking through molasses was nearly impossible. It sucked at their boots and legs like quicksand. Ladders became stuck and useless. Even rope was ineffective because the molasses made everything too slippery to grasp. The Boston Fire Department had to completely reimagine their rescue strategy. They discovered that salt water could thin the molasses enough to make movement possible, so fireboats began pumping seawater onto the affected area. But this created its own problems, as the diluted molasses became even more slippery and unpredictable. Harbor workers and longshoremen, familiar with heavy lifting and dangerous conditions, proved to be the most effective rescuers. They waded into the molasses armed with axes and crowbars, chopping through the hardening syrup to reach trapped victims. Many risked their own lives, knowing that the molasses could trap them as well. The human toll was devastating. 21 people died, including children as young as 10 and adults as old as 78. The dead came from all walks of life: longshoremen, firefighters, children playing hooky from school, mothers shopping for groceries, and elderly residents who couldn't escape fast enough. 150 more were injured, many with broken bones from being hurled against buildings or crushed under debris. The property damage was equally staggering. The molasses destroyed or damaged dozens of buildings, including homes, businesses, and a firehouse. The elevated railway section took months to rebuild. Vehicles, carts, and even ships in the harbor were damaged by the sticky flood. The cleanup costs exceeded $1 million, equivalent to over $15 million today. But the physical cleanup was only part of the challenge. Boston had never faced anything like this before. How do you clean up 2 million gallons of molasses from city streets? The answer involved months of painstaking work. Workers used steam hoses, salt water, and sand to break down and wash away the molasses. Even so, residents claimed that on hot summer days for years afterwards, the North End still smelled faintly of molasses. The sticky residue clung to everything it touched. Workers' clothes had to be thrown away, tools became permanently coated, even the harbor water turned brown, and dead fish floated to the surface, suffocated by the sweet pollution. The molasses seeped into the very foundations of buildings, creating structural problems that lasted for decades. The legal aftermath was equally complex. Families of victims filed lawsuits against the Purity Distilling Company, leading to one of the first major corporate liability cases in American history. The company initially claimed that the disaster was caused by anarchist sabotage, reflecting the post-war paranoia of the era. However, investigations revealed the truth: corporate negligence on a scale unimaginable. The trial lasted several years and established important precedents for industry safety regulations in Boston and across the United States. Engineers testified about the tank's defective construction, revealing that the steel was too thin, the rivets improperly installed, and safety tests never conducted. The company was found liable and ordered to pay damages, though the amount was far less than the human cost warranted. This disaster led to significant changes in building codes and industrial regulations in Boston and across the United States. The tragedy demonstrated the need for proper engineering oversight, safety inspections, and corporate accountability. It became a case study in engineering schools and law schools, teaching future professionals about the deadly consequences of cutting corners on safety. The Great Molasses Flood remains unique in American industrial history, a disaster so bizarre it seems fictional, yet so tragic that its lessons continue to resonate over a century later.